right, thank you for joining me today on the Scarecrow Runner podcast. This is a first for me too. Going outside of the Scarecrow Runner studio on the road and an in-person one. Haven't had any in-person interviews. They've all been Zoom and other interviews, and so pretty excited that this is another first. The last episode I had two guests at once, and so that was a first. But I've actually another first. Got a returning guest on with me, Mr. Brian Hoover. If you remember, Brian was our guest where he talked about his adventures on the Pacific Coast Trail. And Brian, when we talked, it was literally the night before you were getting ready to go out and do it again.
Yeah.
And you already had some inclination that it may not happen. You were talking about the challenges, what might happen with, COVID-19 was just rearing up at the time. And you were concerned about not being able to, have the aid along the trail and stuff. And then it turns out the next morning, all bets are off. Pacific Coast Trail was a no-go because they closed the trails, they closed everything. And so then it was like, you had all this adventure planned out. And then it was like, crap, what do I do? But you already had plans to do something else. And so you immediately started planning some new stuff.
Yeah.
And so Brian is just an amazing individual, and he just does not sit still. And if he sits still, it's on the beach in some remote location with a campfire and a beer in his hand and listening to stories from people that he just meets along the way, or just adventuring along the coast somewhere. It's awesome to watch his videos and read his posts. We can live vicariously through him and all of his adventures. But the latest adventure, so the Pacific Coast Trail Part 2 did not happen, but that didn't stop Brian. Brian decided to kayak the entire Mississippi River from the Canadian border down to the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to share, or have him share, this adventure with you guys today. So Brian, welcome again.
Thank you.
It's good to see you in person. We're having a little coffee at Starbucks, so we'll give Starbucks a plug there. I'm nursing my favorite caramel macchiato. What are you drinking?
Just
black
a regular coffee.
Black coffee.
Yep.
That's all right. I like black as well. But Brian, so first of all, how were you feeling? The last time we talked was literally the night before you were getting ready to set off for your adventure on the Pacific Coast Trail. What were your feelings, the next day when they said, it's a no-go? You kind of expected it, but how are you feeling?
So yeah, we were literally in the car on the way. I was already in San Diego where we did the interview, and literally in the car on the way to the trailhead. We were going to camp there that night. It was going to be my second time doing the Pacific Crest Trail, and we were in the car and we heard on the radio that the governor did a mandatory stay-at-home order, and literally 15 minutes after that, the PCT advised everyone to stay home, and those were kind of the last final straws. I don't want to be a rule breaker, so yeah, I was kind of bummed. But
so what if you had decided to be a rule breaker? I'd assume if you were out on the trail, you run the risk of getting fined or whatever, right?
Yeah, and even shunned. A lot of these towns wanted the hikers in town to boost their economy. Other towns, their medical facilities are stretched thin already. So, it wouldn't have been fun. And, part of the PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail, is the camaraderie, the thousands of people that do it. And it would have been a graveyard. I still would have enjoyed myself, but, that trail's going to be there every year. So
you would have had a massive challenge to try to even tackle that, because I know the first time that you went through, a lot of the opportunities were people that were opening their homes up to y'all with food and shelter.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have had that. You would have had to have been literally in a tent or just sleeping under the stars in a bedroll.
Right.
And totally exposed. And with the elements facing, that would have been a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
I can't imagine doing that with that amount of time. Maybe for a short hike, right?
Sure.
But to do the whole thing like that, the odds would most likely be against you in that. And of course, then you're dealing with the challenge of you would have been dealt with trying to get supplies, right? Going into town, you might not have been able to go into town because they may have been like, no, sorry, we don't want any outsiders.
I mean, that trail, you depend on hitchhiking. You know, a lot of times the town is, 12, 15 miles from the trailhead. So, and getting hitches would have been very tough. Getting into town would have been tough. Yeah, it would have been 100 times harder than it is in a normal year.
So 15 minutes before you guys were about to kick this off, you get the no-go. So I know that you're a very prepared individual because as a former race director, and you still do races and stuff of that nature. But being an outdoorsman and an adventurous individual, you're always looking for the next thing. You're always planning, right, for your next adventure, because you have an A, B, and a C, and if this doesn't work out, then I can always fall back on this. So from there, I know you kind of ventured over to the coast of Santa Monica. Was it Santa Monica?
Yeah, Santa Monica, Fort Bragg.
Beautiful.
Northern California coast, yeah.
I thought at one point you were going to fall off the cliff and we wouldn't hear from you again, because Brian literally edged right up by the cliff and it was windy. But man, to see the surf crashing against the rocks down below on the hidden beaches, that was breathtaking alone. That's an adventure in itself. But so how much time kind of transpired for you to shift gears and start focusing on your next adventure on the Mississippi?
Yeah, so I had so much fun on the Pacific Crest Trail. I love to see the country, travel. This might make some people angry, but I really don't like cities anymore. I try to stay, in nature as much as I can. So I actually put a Facebook post out and asking if anyone was interested in kayaking the entire Mississippi, not really thinking anyone would really take me up on the offer, but someone did, and it was kind of those tentative plans. We hadn't said for sure. I was literally sitting on the beach, living in my van. I was up in Fort Bragg, and this girl said, "Hey, I'm in, let's do it." And we started planning, and doing that's been a dream of mine for a while. At first I was going to do it in a boat, but then I thought, I don't know, just in a kayak would be just a wonderful way to experience the heartland of our country. There's so much history on it. So yeah, it had been a dream for a couple of years, and once my PCT plans were dashed, I kind of shifted gears and started researching that trip.
So one of the questions I was curious about, you've got this plan on the back burner, PCT falls through, and before too long you were like, hey, a couple months later you were off and going on the river.
Yep.
How much training did you have? Did you have any at all? Because I know you talked about it at times on your posts that your shoulders were sore. You've got blisters, I'm sure, still on your hands. Did you have any training at all?
No, as a matter of fact, I'd only been kayaking I think 3 times, and that's going into some touristy spot, and they got the kayak rentals for an hour. So I think I spent a total of 3 hours in a kayak or canoe in my whole life. So I was about as a beginner as you can. I've never, except for this trip, dipped my toe into the Mississippi River. I've driven past it on bridges, did some research on it, but yeah, I was about as much of a newbie as you can get.
So that's like, if you guys think about it, let's just retract that. Brian had only spent about 3 different occasions being in a kayak for a couple hours at a time. And he's getting ready to go kayak the Mississippi River, the largest river in the United States.
Second largest. Yep.
Sorry.
Yep.
Colorado would be.
They call it the Missouri is the longest. It dumps into the Mississippi, so I don't really call it.
But one of the, basically the largest, in my mind, that goes from one border to the, down to the Gulf. It's the separation of the United States, right? It cuts right down through the heartland.
Sure.
That's like me deciding if I was a novice runner, that would be like me signing up for a 100-miler and only have ran a few 5Ks and then decide to take on a 100-miler. That's the kind of complexity and the depth of, if you think about it, because if you've only kayaked, 2 or 3 times, and then you decide to go and tackle the Mississippi River, one, you're dealing with stuff you've never even dealt with before, and it was ad hoc, as they would say. Just as it came to you. I mean, talk about jumping into the frying pan, literally. Yeah. So, but I can't even comprehend, just be like, wow, talk about, that is true sense of adventure right there.
Yeah.
Not worrying about if you're, the way I like to see it, Brian, is there's a phrase that they say that and I'm trying to get my mind wrapped around it here, is God equips the called and calls the equipped. And so whether or not you had ever kayaked before, and whether or not you had ever even done anything like that, you have it in you. It's something that you love, and you aren't worried about training, right? It's training as you go. The way I see it is life is too short to worry about putting a whole lot of training into it, because as we both know, injuries can happen, finances can fall through, timing like COVID blows up your entire plan. If we spend all of our time planning and prepping,
waiting for the perfect time,
waiting for that perfect moment, those perfect running conditions, those perfect times to get out there, you're going to miss the window of opportunity.
Sure.
The true sense of adventure, in my mind, is just to go, just like the Nike slogan, just do it. Who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares how long it took you? Who cares if you're prepared? Just jump in it and go. And if you fall, if you fall short, nobody's going to be blasting you, because, I mean, I can't judge you because I've never kayaked but one time, and I dang sure haven't kayaked on a Mississippi River. So just get out there and do it, guys. That's one of the things I'd like to encourage y'all to do, is if you want to do something, just go do it.
Yeah.
Because if you wait around, life is going to pass you by, opportunities going to pass you by, and then you're going to be sitting as an old man, old woman, wishing you had done stuff in your younger days when you could do it. It's like a lot of people say, well, I'm going to wait to have kids until I can afford it. As you and I both know,
Yeah.
whether or not you have the money or not, you're not going to be able to afford kids anyways. Kids are expensive. Adults are expensive.
Yeah.
Life is expensive, guys. And so hobbies are expensive, especially stuff like this guy. I mean, you know, he's got all this gear and stuff. And so take the opportunity. If life hands you lemons, make lemonade, and don't ponder it too long. Just go, right? You got to have some preparedness. You had to have some kind of game plan, because otherwise you're not going to know where to go and kind of where to start and what to, you know, you got to have some kind of knowledge, because you had to know what kind of, you had to have a kayak, right? You have to have paddles. You have to have a game plan. It's not that you can't go prepared, but you just got to fly by the seat of your pants sometimes, right?
Yep.
You had enough information to know what you wanted to do, and you made the dream a reality. And so, tell me, Brian, you guys started up at the Canadian border, right?
We started in northern Minnesota,
northern
close
Minnesota.
to the Canadian border. A place called Lake Itasca is where the headwaters are.
Okay. And so, I remember seeing the video of you guys getting ready to push off.
Mm-hmm.
And so, kind of paint the picture for us. Because when we think Mississippi River, you think of the mighty Mississippi, which that's not a lie. It's mighty, it's big. But where you all started isn't as mighty as some might think.
No.
So kind of take us into, just lead us into the adventure.
Sure. So where the Mississippi starts, it's a place called Lake Itasca, and it's literally just like a 10-foot, the lake is over here, and there's like a 10-foot chain of little rocks, and the lake just kind of overflows those rocks into like a 6-foot ditch. I mean, it's really like a ditch for the first week or so. You know, anywhere from 6 inches deep to 4 or 5 feet deep. I mean, for the first week or so, we're pushing our butts, trying to scooch our kayak off the bottom because it's so shallow.
So that makes me think of the Illinois River when I went floating the river. The one time that I went on the Illinois River, the river was low, mm-hmm. and our raft was dragging bottom, right?
Yep.
And you literally had to get up and push it, or do your best, and you're scooting along the rocks.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine doing that for several days at a time, to where that's tiresome, because you're having
mm-hmm.
to do extra work, right? You're scraping bottom, and as we both know, we're not lightweights,
right?
So you're dragging bottom.
Yep.
I remember one thing though, is when you guys started, there was quite a bit of a send-off, right? There's a lot of people that were there, and this is a very small area. There's not much water there, but guys, if you don't know it or not, it's a big deal for people to go and kayak or float the Mississippi. People make it a big deal, and you're almost seen as almost a celebrity of sorts.
It is. So, like the PCT, there's so many people that do it. I mean, like 5,000 people do this per year. So when people hear of someone that's planning kayaking, it's kind of a more, wow, this guy must be crazy, or how cool. It's more of a unique thing. So yeah, Lake Itasca is a pretty popular tourist spot, and a lot of people want to see where the Mississippi River starts at. So yeah, there were quite a few people. We had a mini celebrity that we met on the very first day. We knew he was going to start that day. He was 81 years old, named Stan Stark, and we also knew that if he finished, that he'd be in the Guinness Book of World Records for the oldest at 81 years old. So we ended up kayaking. We met him on the very first day, and kayaked. I kayaked with him till the Gulf of Mexico. So we got a little bit more attention and publicity because
Sure.
of traveling with him. So
Kind of riding on the coattails of.
Yeah, for sure.
So you went with Stan and then a husband and wife.
Husband and wife. Yep.
And I know the husband of that team, he had to leave to go back to work at
Correct.
one point. So then it was you and her and Stan.
Yes.
But how much experience did they have going into this trip? Because you're a newbie. I
Right.
mean, you're literally wet behind the ears. No real experience. Were they pretty seasoned?
Stan was. Stan's, he actually kayak races just like ultras, running races. They have tons of kayaking races, anywhere from, 15 miles to 300 miles. So he was very experienced. About day 11 for us, we ran across another couple. These were young kids that were kayaking the entire Mississippi, but they were fishing. So if the fishing was good, they might paddle, just 5 miles because they'd be fishing. So Chase is the other guy that did the whole thing with us, and he was pretty experienced kayaker as well, a fishing kayaker. So yeah, I was definitely the newbie.
So it helps though, you're inexperienced and raw at this, but you had help along the way. I mean, you weren't completely alone. If you would have been going at it alone, it would have been a whole different ball game in most instances. I don't have any doubt in my mind you wouldn't have finished it, but it would have been probably a lot longer and
Sure.
a lot more challenging and probably a lot more interesting stories of being cut and things like that. And we'll get into that one here in a minute. But and so yeah, Stan did finish.
Yes.
And so he did enter the Guinness Book of World Records as the oldest individual to kayak the Mississippi River, which, wow, that's amazing. Yeah. And just the fact that you got to go along for the ride with him, I'm sure is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Just to think that you were part of history.
Sure.
In a roundabout way. I mean, you got to experience history. Most people, they might hear it on the news, or they might see it on a blog or Facebook post or something. History made. 81-year-old man has kayaked the Mississippi River. But Brian, you were with him almost the whole way. And so you got to experience that firsthand. You got to talk to him. You got to spend time with him. You got to pick his brain on stuff. You guys had stories and swapped horror stories and experiences. Oh, yeah. And so you got to be a part of something special. And I know that you'll always cherish that because, I mean, that alone is an adventure in itself of just listening to a man of his age, his stature and experience, just to pick his brain and listen to him. Mm-hmm. I mean, we always hear respect your elders. It's like I used to laugh, when my dad would tell me that. But as I grew into a young man, I learned that I enjoyed speaking with people that were twice my age and even older, just to listen to their stories.
Yeah.
Right? Because once that generation passes, those stories are gone.
Yeah.
But you were able to get some of that, and he passed it along to you, and that'll forever be etched in
Sure.
in Brian Hoover's mind.
Yeah.
and however he shares that with others, but the story will live on.
Yeah.
And so that's so awesome. So it starts off just paddling along and dragging the bottom. And I recall that a lot of what you guys paddled through were rice field, basically like rice fields, right?
Yeah.
And heavily vegetated areas and very, very shallow, very narrow bodies of water. How much time, how long did it take you to go through Minnesota and get out of the smaller, I know you guys eventually paddled into St. Paul, Minneapolis area, which was, you began to expand that broaden that horizon. how much time did it take for you to go through Minnesota and all of those little tributaries?
Yeah, so, one of the hardest parts during the beginning of the trip was finding a place literally to get off the river, because, there is the actual river, but the quote unquote banks were not soil. They were water with cattails and wild rice all over. So you literally couldn't find dry ground for a lot of times. So you'd have to paddle, if you only wanted to paddle 15 miles, sometimes we'd end up paddling 23 to find dry land. So, but the river changes so gradually. At first, during Minnesota, a lot of Minnesota, the water's clear. You can see the plants underneath. You can see the fish swimming below you. The wildlife was just absolutely incredible. I mean, there'd be days we'd literally see 50 to 70 bald eagles a day.
Wow.
So,
That's
but yeah,
awesome.
you kind of wake up one day and you go, wow, the river's getting a little bit wider. But it's such a slow, gradual change that you don't really notice it that much. So Minnesota was the longest state that we paddled through. I don't know how many days it took us to get through it, but
Yeah. So you mentioned, you don't have much dry land, right? You've
Right.
got this very soft, very moist shoreline.
sure.
Lots of cattails, lots of vegetation, rice fields. One of the questions that I'm sure the listeners and the watchers are curious about is, what do you do about going to the bathroom? What do you do about eating, right? Because if you're paddling all day long,
Yeah.
I mean, you're still needing to consume liquids to stay hydrated. You're still having to do that so that you've got energy to paddle, because
Right.
if you have no energy, you're not going to paddle. What did you guys do about that? Because, I mean, if you're drinking fluids,
Yeah.
you're going to burn through some of it, but at some point, Mother Nature's going to call, you got to go to the bathroom.
Right.
You don't have any place to, dock up.
Yeah.
What do you do?
So, my buddies, Chase and both Stan, they carried a pee bottle. Okay, sounds kind of gross, but it's just a little pee bottle they kept in their kayak and they peed in it. I have a little harder time peeing in that position, so we would take lunches. We'd find boat docks. There would be places that we could get
Okay.
off, but sometimes it'd be 3 or 4 miles before we saw dry land. But yeah, we'd keep some snacks in the kayak or in our life jacket pockets and kind of snack a little bit during the day. For the first half of the trip, we literally took lunches. We'd find some place, a bank and find a rock and eat a regular lunch. Toward the last half, I don't know why, we just kind of quit eating lunches during the day. So, but yeah.
You were ready to be done.
Yeah, we were. We were
wanted to
kind of more
cover-
on a mission.
You
Yeah.
wanted to cover the ground as quickly as possible
Sure.
and get done as soon as possible. While you enjoyed it,
Right.
it also was taxing, right?
Right.
It's tiring. You're missing your grandbaby that was born while you were
Yeah.
on the river.
Yep.
So, you miss things like that. While it's a great opportunity, a great adventure, you do miss out on things that, like a grandchild being born.
Yeah.
And I know you're excited to
Miss his
spend
family.
time with that beautiful baby.
Yep.
Now that you're back in Tulsa. I was curious, Brian, when you're packing lunches,
Uh-huh.
I mean, you're in a kayak, and I know there's one-man kayaks, and I know there's two-man kayaks. They don't hold a lot of
No.
supplies, right? And you also have to make sure you have enough room for your extra water. You've got to have your tent and your other gear. You have to have all your gear, and you have to have room for food. How much food were you able to take? How
Right.
much stuff? When did you guys stop? Did you buy enough for a couple days? How did you guys do that?
Yeah, so we knew where the towns were. We had maps, and truthfully, for most of the trip, we had actually pretty good internet service. I was really surprised. So, we could go on our phones and see where the next town is. And we would buy enough food to last us to get to the next town, for sure. Sometimes the towns were so close that, we could... in the beginning of the trip, there were so many towns, we were actually stopping at, bar and restaurant grills that were literally on the water, kind of like Blue Rose Cafe. We'd pull up, they'd have a boat dock, and
That's
we'd
cool.
go up, have beer, hamburgers. So, but once we get down to St. Louis, the bottom kind of drops out of civilization. I mean, I don't know why, except for, well, let me backtrack a little bit. There's really 3 sections of the river. You've got from the headwaters to Minneapolis. No barge traffic at all. No barges, just fishing boats, pleasure yachts. that can cause pretty big wakes. Then from Minneapolis, and in that first section, there were dams, but there weren't locks. So we would actually have to take our kayaks out of the water on one side of the dam, put them on these little wheels, and wheel them around the dams. When we got to St. Louis, there became locks, so we'd go through the lock system. It drops you down like a little bathtub, and that's where the barges begin, is St. Louis, and all the way down. So it's, and then once you get to St. Louis, there's no more dams at all. So I think that's the reason the towns, you can't have towns on the river, because if the river floods, the towns have to be behind these levees. So there's not much civilization after St. Louis, and we'd have to be a lot more careful about how many days worth of food do we need, how much water do we need to get to the next civilization, I guess.
Okay, so you talked about the locks, and I remember seeing some Facebook Lives that you had posted, which was a really interesting thing to watch, because, I mean, for those of you that don't know how dams and locks work, you know, basically you got these levees, right, and then you've got the locks, and the locks are like walls, right, and when the wall raises up, the water comes out, and when the wall closes, the water starts to fill back up, right? So they got it, and the barges come through, they got to raise it up to let the water go through, and then they close it back up, and it starts to fill up. And so one of the things that was interesting is when you guys are by these locks, you guys are literally holding on to a railing system or something like that, and just waiting. Yeah, so it's basically two big gates. So they open the gate, and you can paddle into this big, long, narrow bathtub, I call it. Not too narrow. And the lock masters will just lower a rope, and really you're against a wall, so the ropes just kind of help you keep from drifting in and out. I think it's just really a safety thing. Sure. But yeah, the first time I was pretty nervous. You know, I'd never been through one, but I didn't even know the water was lowering. It's literally like being in a bathtub, and you know, unless you're watching the wet spot on the wall, you don't even know you're going down, and you can just see that, you know, you can see the wet spot, and you can see that you're getting lowered. But it was unique, and we went through like 27 of those. So how much time, when you go through a lock, how much time did you guys, you know, elapse? You know, was it like 30 minutes, an hour? It depends. Sometimes there's 3 ways to contact them. We carried these VHF radios, so you could contact them on the radio. We had a list of phone numbers, and there's even like a doorbell that you can ring. But if there's no traffic, no other barges or no other pleasure craft, sometimes we'd be in and out in 15 minutes. But barges are that's the commerce of our nation. They come first. And sometimes they have to break these barges down. They have to disassemble them to get them in 2 different pieces. So sometimes it could be up to 3-hour wait, depending if you have a lot of barge traffic. Yeah, I never really realized, you know, you see barges floating down the river on a regular basis. If you guys haven't really ever been close to a barge, I mean, they are massive. I mean, they're not small. And to go through these narrow areas, well, you think there's regulations, right? You gotta have a certain size, or it's not going to get through, or it's going to get stuck, and then you're going to have problems. I had never really thought about them having to disassemble and then reassemble and put it back on. You know, they're 100. Each barge is 100 feet long, and the longest they can get through these locks are three long. So they would have, if it was a 6 long barge, they'd have to break it in half and then get it through in 2 pushes. So, and if the barges have a big load on it, then you got to take the load off. Right? No, they go through full or empty. But the largest, what we call a fleet of them, you know, rarely do you see a towboat pushing just one. It's multiple. It's multiple. The biggest we saw was 7 across and 8 long, so 56 of these. So they're so long that they're 100 feet? 100 feet each, so it'd be 700 feet. That is a massive... Wow. Yeah. It's amazing the commerce that happens on that river. My brain's thinking here, it's like, okay, you got a 100 feet long barge, and you got 8 and 7, so that's 5,600, basically 5,600 feet of steel coming down the river.
they're so long that you don't even hear. That's one of the dangerous things is we're paddling. I mean, the barges go both ways on the river, but they're so long that you don't hear the motors of the tugboat because you've got 700 feet of barge.
All right, cool.
Sure.
Well, everybody, as crazy as 2020 is, this podcast interview was no exception. And it's funny because Brian and I had talked before we started talking yesterday about how, things can get disrupted and recordings cannot happen. And as you know, for whatever reason, my laptop decided to stop recording our audio, but the video was spot on. It was great. I mean, what can you say? So Brian and I have decided to jump back on together again tonight to finish what we started yesterday. And you know what? The way I see it is, it's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get back up and you go and you finish. And so, just like in ultra running and in any adventure in life, you keep going. If at first you don't succeed, you try again. And so here we are, a second attempt, and we are recording, so we're good. And it's picking up my voice, and so it's picking up Brian's voice and his face, so we're good. And so before we got rudely cut off by my laptop yesterday, you were describing, Brian, the size of the barges. You had mentioned that they're 100 feet in length. And in most instances, the widest would be set 8 by 7, right? And at that point, you were talking about how the tugboats are, the tugboat is in the very back, and you often don't hear the tugboat until it's right up on you. So I think the question that I asked preceding into that was, are the barges what you would consider a silent assassin? Because you don't hear anything with the tugboat until it's right up on you. But do you hear the barges at all?
Yeah. So, I mean, you've got, like I said, if it's, 7 or 8 barges long, you've got 800 feet, almost 3 football fields of the silent actual barges. So, yeah, by the time you hear the tug or the towboat, those things are right up on you. So, yeah, we really tried every 5-10 minutes to kind of turn around, look behind us, and, make sure nothing's creeping up on us, because those things, they can't stop on a dime. They can't even really veer out of your way too much, because there's only a limited channel width that they keep a certain area in the middle of the river, usually dredged. I think it's 9 feet that they need, or they'll run aground and slow commerce down and all that. So
and it's really not like you can they're moving at a decent rate of speed, right, for what they can, for how heavy they are. Sure. And of course, as we know, things that are in water are buoyant and more or less weightless, but still you can only paddle as fast as you can, but does not mean that you're going to get out of the way of something if it's right up on you, right? And so what was the most intense encounter with a barge that you all experienced?
Yeah, so the further down the river, it seems like the more commerce you get, the more barges there are. Not only are these things coming at you, or not only are they coming behind you, half are coming at you and half are coming behind you. You've got barges all along the sides of the river that are parked, and a lot of times they're going to be pulling out. Sometimes a lot of times they need to cross to the other side of the river, because that's where the channel is. So, down in the St. Louis area and south of there, there was this one time we had literally, I think it was 2 barges coming at us, which they create a lot more waves, a lot more wake, because they're powered up. They're battling the current. And we had one coming up behind us. We had a couple other boats in the area, and we just, we wound up against a steep wall, a steep riverbank. It wasn't a gradual shore, and those waves, they not only come at you, they bounce back off of these walls. So, to make a long story short, we were in the worst possible location we could have been. We had 3 barges coming at us in different directions. And, we were battling these, 8-9 foot waves, kind of surfing them, trying to turn into them. So yeah, there were some scary moments. We took some water in our vessels. So, you're just always trying to, it's almost like playing Frogger, those things, they do watch out for us, and they do try to, obviously they don't want to hit us anymore, and we want to be too close to them. But yeah, it gets a little hairy sometimes.
So what's one of the things, Brian, that you guys do when you're kayaking to keep water out of your vessel?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So we basically have two things. We've got these little hand pumps. They're just about 5 feet long, and it's just a handle that you kind of pump up and down, and that can get water out of your vessel pretty quickly, especially if it fills up with a lot of water. We also keep sponges, just a regular like automotive sponge, maybe 8-12 inches, and to kind of mop out the water that that's not really deep, but to try to keep most of the water out. So those are our two main things that we use. But if you take a lot of water in, it's usually because it's really, you're taking in a lot of waves. So in those cases, you really can't stop paddling. When you stop paddling, you're going to turn the wrong way into the waves, and you're just going to take more water in. So in those few instances that we did fill up, we just paddled quickly to shore, got those pumps out, and tried to bail out all the water. So yeah.
During your guys' trip, did you all stay pretty dry for the most part, or did you get pretty wet at times?
So my kayak sits really low in the water. I've only got about 3.5 inches of what they call freeboard. That's the part that's sticking up out of the water, especially like kind of where my butt is. So I stayed pretty wet. Even little small waves would lap in. They'd get my seat wet, which would get my shirt wet, which would get my shorts wet. It kind of wicks its way up. So I did stay pretty wet for most of the time. And it's not bad, if it's hot weather, it actually sometimes feels pretty good. But, there were a few cooler evenings, and, you get done paddling, you get on the beach, starting to set up your tent in the wet clothes. And there were a few times I was shivering a little bit, so that I'd change into dry clothes. But
you didn't have any instances of, in ultra running, a lot of times when you're running, in the elements and you're wet, a lot of runners for long periods of time will develop what we call trench foot. Did you ever develop trench butt?
Yeah. Believe it or not, no, I didn't. I don't know why, because I was sitting a wet, soggy butt almost all the time. Yeah, I didn't have any problems with that, believe it or not. So my feet got a little bit wrinkly at times because my cockpit would be filled up with water and my feet would be kind of in water for a while. But yeah, no issues on that.
Sure. It's just like sitting in a bathtub, right? Your feet get wrinkled after you've been in there for too long. So you mentioned how your kayak was kind of like a lowrider sitting low in the water.
Right.
So I know that you were with several others. And I know you said their kayaks were better. You had one that was a husband and wife, so they had a dual kayak, and then you had a solo one that was kind of you said it was fast, but it was also kind of not real stable, right? So what's kind of the differences between the kayaks? If someone's wanting to get into kayaking, what would you recommend as a kayak for a first timer, or even somebody that's well experienced?
Yeah, I mean, and so that's a tough question. If you're just going to be on calm lakes or lazy rivers, these kayaks that you get at Walmart or Academy Sports, they're great. But if you're going on like the Mississippi River or an extended trip, you really want something longer. First off, you're going to be going so much faster. The longer the kayak, generally the faster the kayak is. The skinnier the kayak is, the faster it's going to be. But the skinnier it is, the less stable it is. I mean, I can't even, I can't get into my kayak as it's floating. I have to be beached to get into it. Because, I mean, you just put one little pressure on the right, you're going to tip over to the right. One little pressure to the left. So if I was to do it again, I would definitely get a little different kayak. I'd get one with a little bit more freeboard, and I'd sacrifice a little bit of the speed for some more stability. There were some parts of the river that I'm literally paddling for my life. They're not for my life, but I'm doing everything I can not to tip over. And the people paddling with me, I struggled a little bit more in my little tippy kayak. So yeah, there are definitely lots of different kayaks, and every kayak, it's kind of like running shoes. If you have a really lightweight pair of running shoes, you're going to sacrifice usually the cushioning.
Sure.
Kayaks are the same way. Stan's, the 81-year-old, he had a fiberglass kayak, super light, really lightweight, but any little rock would do it damage. My other buddy Chase, he had this big, wide, stable kayak. I mean, he could almost stand up in his kayak. Waves didn't bother him at all, but he was almost twice as slow as Stan and I. So, everything's kind of a give and take.
And so with it being slower, it's going to require more strength and more power to, paddle and be along with you guys,
and
right?
even so, he's still slower. He had a fishing kayak. I mean, it's a great vessel to go fishing in. But, if I paddled my hardest and Stan paddled his hardest, we would be in camp 3 or 4 hours before him.
Wow.
So we would tend to, a lot of times I just paddle slow with him because, we were good company, we were good friends, and it was pretty easy for me. And then Stan would leave later in the day, then he'd catch up to us and he'd pass us. So, we weren't paddling together all the time, and it worked out. He kept up with us, but he had to paddle quite a bit longer in the day. So
I was wondering if there was times where you guys were going solo, based off of speed and kind of, the tourist, aspect where you're, enjoying the scenery and, everyone else kind of goes on down the river. So I didn't know if you tried to stay with them as much as possible, which I would think you would, but I figured that you probably did have some solo time.
It's kind of like an ultra, if you're running it with a friend, for 2 or 3 hours, you two may be running together, and then, you're feeling good and your buddy might not be feeling as peppery. And so, yeah, it was kind of half and half. We were together about half the time, and the other half we kind of would go at our own pace that was comfortable to us. So, yeah, good question, though.
Yeah. And so about how much time did you spend on the water? If I recall, when we were talking yesterday, of course, the listeners didn't hear this part, but you were talking that you guys would basically paddle all day long, but you never
and like
went
I said,
at night,
a lot of
for
that,
safety reasons.
We didn't paddle at night, but when we started, it was mid-July in northern Minnesota, and I mean, I didn't realize this, but I mean, it was still a little bit daylight at 9:30 p.m. at night. So we definitely paddled longer into the evenings during the beginning of our trip. Whereas the end, we got to the Gulf on November 3rd. It was, good and dark at 5:30. So, but I would say on average about 8 to 10 hours a day. We were kind of up with the sunset, and most days we would try to paddle. We'd give ourselves about an hour to set up our camp in the daylight, set up our tents, get a little meal cooking before it got too dark. But yeah, 8 to 10 hours, I'd say at least.
How many miles would you normally get in that period of time?
I would say on average about 25. I may have said this earlier, but in the beginning of the river, the current is much slower, so you're going slower. Toward the end, the river is moving a little bit more. I think our biggest day, and we could have done bigger mileage than this, but someone in the group usually is getting a little tired and wants to camp. But I think our biggest day was like 45 miles.
That's pretty good for for
and our shortest
paddling,
day,
right?
We probably days that. Yeah. We weren't in a hurry, but at the same time, even New Orleans gets a little bit cold. We didn't want to be finishing at Christmas time, so we pushed the mileage when we could. Yeah.
Did you ever tip over, Brian, or any of your partners tip over? Really?
No, I don't believe any of us tipped over, which is pretty amazing because at least I came close several times. I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but there was one, actually the scariest part of this whole trip was called Chain of Rocks. And it's a natural rock formation that, what a low river dam is, or a low water dam. There's one in the Arkansas, I think at 31st Street in Riverside. Yeah. It was a natural one of these, and we knew it was coming up, but I didn't know it was coming up that quickly. And I'm kind of out in front of Stan and Chase, and I hear this just, water sound. I was like, what is that? And it wasn't until I got closer that I saw. It was this natural low water dam that drops, it's not a waterfall, but it probably drops 7-8 feet. And it started sucking me in. You get too close to some of this stuff, and I don't know the hydraulics behind it, but the current gets a lot faster. And Stan, the 81-year-old, caught up to me, and I was like, Stan, that's the low water dam. I'm screaming because the water's so loud. And we start trying to go parallel to it, but a little bit upstream to get out of its grip. And I just see Stan, he's getting closer and closer to the edge of this low water dam. And it's like, Stan, come upstream more. And he just kept getting closer. And I heard him yell. He goes, I'm going in whether I want to or not. So he got his kayak turned around and he went over this chain of rocks, this low water dam. He took in a lot of water. He managed to stay upright. He didn't die. And then my buddy Chase comes up and I go, Stan just went over the chain of rocks is what they call this area. And we'd all heard about it. We knew it was dangerous. And Chase was pretty calm. He's like, okay. So he turns his kayak around. He's paddling completely upriver, just straight upriver. And I'm paddling too. And I look over at him. He's paddling his heart out, but he's not going anywhere. The current is sucking him in as fast as he's paddling upriver. And he ends up going over it as well. He said the waves are up over his head. Water's just pounding his kayak. And he survived as well. I was able to get out of its grip, thank God, because I was the one who should not have gone. I would have tipped for sure.
Right.
I made it to the other side. I dragged my kayak up on the bank, dragged it up this embankment over these rocks through this dirt and mud, and got to the other side and put in lower than it. But that was, as a matter of fact, we didn't talk about it to anyone else. The first things out of Stan's mouth was, don't put that on Facebook. I go, don't worry, I won't. He wanted to let his family know what happened, and make sure they knew that, he was okay and all that before we kind of talked about it much. But now we kind of laugh at it. So
it's pretty intense for sure.
Yeah.
So what was it like for you guys, when you're camping, you're setting up tents or sleeping in your sleeping bag, whatever it might be, and I know oftentimes you didn't have much room on the shorelines to do much. How did you guys arrange that? How far off of the the river were you? Were there specific campsites that you guys could go to?
Yeah. So up in the northern part, like I say, it was all water on the side. So you almost had to camp at these designated little spots. And they're just basically landings where there's dry land. Some of them had a picnic table. Some of them had like an outhouse, literally not an outhouse. They literally had a toilet in the middle of the woods with no walls around you. You're just doing your thing. But then as we got further south, there's these beautiful beaches, beautiful sand beaches. And, truthfully, the biggest thing was making sure that we pulled our kayaks far enough up on shore so that the waves from the barges don't inundate our kayaks while they're on the beach and have them float away. So some of the beaches were gigantic. Some of them were 2 or 3 miles long. I mean, we could have camped a mile from each other, and others were just really small where we had to keep our tents, within what we called snoring distance. So, it just ran the whole gamut as far as how much room we had to set up our gear and our tents and cook our food and stuff. So,
but for the most part, I mean, you didn't have really any risk of getting flooded or floating away, did you?
There was one day, and I don't know what it was. We were pretty close to the very last dam, so we must have been a little bit south of St. Louis. And maybe they had let some water out, or maybe it had rained miles and miles upshore. But when we set up our tents and left our kayaks, they were probably a good 10, 12 feet from the water's edge. And my kayak started floating in the middle of the night. Stan woke up and pulled mine farther up on shore. And when Chase woke up, he literally had water probably 4 inches from the opening of his tent. So We're not really sure why the water came up so much that night, but yeah, we did have a few little instances that, and then from that point on, we started camping further up shore just in case. So yeah.
What were for the most part your regular staples as far as what you had for food? I know there was times you guys would go into towns and have a meal at a restaurant or whatnot, but and so what would somebody generally be eating, like for yourself, along the way? I know you said previously towards the end of the trip you stopped eating lunches and such, but I mean you still have to eat to have energy. So what kind of foods did you guys consume during your trip?
Yeah, we did a lot of oatmeals. I think all of us ate a lot of oatmeal. I mean, I would do some days like Pop-Tarts, not the best, healthiest food, but Stan for dinner almost every night, Stan had those fancy called Mountain House meals, or the dehydrated meals that you just add the boiling water to in the packet and eat. Some of those are really good. I did a lot of, like literally I'd buy like Dennison's chili, chili con carne, scoop it out of the can and put it in my little pot and heat that up. We did some fresh fruit. With kayaking, you can actually take, it's not like backpacking, what I'm used to. In backpacking, you really want lightweight food. Mm-hmm. But with kayaking, really anything that could be heated up, any kind of grab and go foods. Trying to think of what else, a lot of nuts, a lot of trail mix. Oh man, I'd eat Vienna sausages, really anything that you can think of, we probably ate at one time or another on the trip. For lunches, we usually was just, little bars, Kind bars, Cliff bars. But yeah, I can't really think of too much food that we didn't try. I did a lot of tortillas with peanut butter, tortillas with ham, and that kind of stuff. So kind of stayed away from the chocolate because it melted,
Yeah, especially with it being summertime, right? So, you're in the heat and, around the waters, stuff starts to get nasty. So yeah. Even though, most people would probably, make sure that it's airtight and water resistant. Yeah. We both know that no matter how much you secure something, things still get wet, get sand in them, right? And, there's nothing worse than getting sand in your food. It's just, you're cooking eggs or whatever, and the wind blows and you automatically have the grit in the food. So, yeah.
Everything we did was in dry bags. And even those dry bags, water's miraculous how it can penetrate in the smallest openings. There are a few times where all my food got wet. And so I'd either eat wet food or, have to go into town and replenish my food stores. So, yeah, it was a challenge. It was definitely a challenge keeping everything dry. That's for sure.
So speaking of staying dry, how was the weather for you guys along the journey? I know that, there was a few storms that you guys experienced. And of course, towards the end of the trip, you were delayed due to Hurricane Zeta specifically. But for the most part, how was your weather?
Anthony, I could probably do this trip 10 years in a row, I'm guessing, and not have as good of weather as we had. I would literally say that, 100 out of the 111 days was between 75 and 82 degrees, sunny. I think we only paddled in the rain like maybe 2 or 3 days, and even that was for a short amount of time. We didn't have too many days of high winds. It was incredible. It literally was, I think the hottest we were a few days in northern Minnesota, which you would think would be the coldest. And then the coldest days we had was literally kind of in the New Orleans area. So, but the bad weather days were few and far between. We really lucked out on the time of year that we went and the weather conditions that we had. So
yeah, that's great.
Like you mentioned, a couple of hurricanes, a couple of nights that we were hunkered in our tents with high winds. But while we were paddling, it was amazing.
I know one of the things when I'm around water, anytime you're around water, you've got bugs like mosquitoes and gnats and things like that. Did you guys have a lot of insects that you dealt with? Because, when you're running along Riverside, you know, in Tulsa, you come around the corner by the river and you get plastered with the black gnats, right?
Yeah. So, and I kind of forgot about how bad these bugs were because it was mostly northern Minnesota, northern and central Minnesota. So Minnesota is known as the land of lakes. Water equals mosquitoes. I mean, some days the mosquitoes were just so bad that we literally could not sit. We would literally eat our lunch walking so they didn't swarm us. We bathed in what we called a Mississippi cologne. It's this 100% or 97% DEET insect repellent, and even that didn't help. But Minnesota also has, and I don't think they have them here, at least I've never experienced them here, called biting flies, or they're not horse flies, but they literally attack mostly from your ankles down, your ankles and your feet. And I mean, they are just every 10 seconds, I'm going, ow, ow. The mosquito repellent doesn't work on them. I mean, you literally have to wear pants on a hot day, or be moving around. Those things are just horrific. And then the bugs got great. You know, once we kind of left Minnesota, they didn't get bad again until we hit southern Louisiana. And then kind of the same thing. We got some of those biting flies. The mosquitoes were not as bad as northern Minnesota, but they were still pretty bad. There's these things called these little white flies that we would get from time to time. So yeah, it tests your patience. I mean, you're just trying to sit and relax, and you're just getting eaten up. So
yeah,
that was
basically you're sitting duck, right? Because
you are
you're just sitting there. You can't do anything, right? You've got to just keep on going, and you're prime real estate for those bugs.
And I say this stuff is 97% DEET. It's very powerful. It still didn't even do the trick. And I always make the joke that I'm going to, in a couple of years, I'm going to see a commercial that says, if you are exposed to 97% DEET, call 1-800-SUE-DEET, or whatever.
Because the lawsuit is pending, right? Because you've been exposed to something that could cause cancer.
Yeah.
Crazy. So aside from bugs and weather, what kind of wildlife, or I guess you would say wildlife or bird life, did you guys see along the way?
Man, we saw. I mean, there were days, I'm not stretching the truth, we probably saw 50 to 70 bald eagles, about the same amount of blue herons, beautiful birds, pelicans. I mean, there were a couple of flocks of pelicans that flew over us, and they would just keep coming and coming, and there must have been 1,000 of them. We saw basically every bird you could almost think of. Beautiful. A lot of them, I had no idea what they were. Fish, we saw walleye. We saw those. I don't know if I talked about the flying Asian carp. Did I go into that at all?
You didn't go into that, but I remember you talking about it on Facebook.
Okay. So if you Google flying Asian carp, you'll see some amazing videos. First off, they're an invasive fish. You can't eat them. They're nasty garbage eaters. But they have a habit of jumping straight out of the water. And I knew that they had these. We hadn't seen a single one. We hadn't seen a single one jump, but we knew we were kind of getting into that area where we'd start seeing them. And I'm paddling pretty fast, maybe going 7-8 miles an hour. And all of a sudden, boom, one just jumped right in front of my kayak. I paddled into it, I guess, or maybe it flew into me. But either way, it hit my lip, bloodied my lip, fell into my lap. And so these kayaks just have a little small, round, little cockpit area. And this fish was probably like 20 pounds. And it's, they're very powerful, very heavy. And this fish is flopping around down in an area where a guy really don't want a big fish flopping around at. And it's got mucus all over me. It bled, so I had blood all over my legs. I managed to kind of dip my hands underneath it and fling it back into the water. But and then we didn't see another one for a week. And then one day we're just paddling, and it was one of the rare times that all three of us are kind of right next to each other. And all of a sudden, boom, 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 there's like 50 of them just jumping up, hitting the back of our boats, hitting our paddles. splashing us like crazy. They just get excited by like propeller noise or rudder noise. I don't know what it is, but they can be dangerous. I mean, they can kill. They've killed boaters, that going 30, 40 miles an hour. And
Yeah, I can imagine if you hit it, yeah, a 20-pound fish, with fins, right? And you go flying into it. Yeah, I could see some, yeah.
Yeah, it was the craziest thing I've ever seen. And I was expecting, and I was still surprised at how many are jumping around.
That's what you literally call a fish story.
Yeah, it was. I mean, and these things can jump like 6, 7 feet up in the air. It's amazing how they can launch themselves. But yeah, that's worth checking out on a video.
I've seen some videos before. I'm pretty sure it was the same thing where they were basically spotlighting them at night, right? And those things are just flying into their boat, by the hundreds and just filling their boat. And of course, you said they're not good to eat, but I know that some countries probably still will eat them because it's a source of protein of some kind. So
yeah. I mean, you could eat them, but they're not. Most people don't keep them. But yeah, I'm sure there's a way you can prepare them. Yeah.
As we know, people will eat they'll eat anything if they're hungry, right? So
sure, exactly.
So what I know that you enjoyed the entire trip. I mean that's an understatement. But what's probably one of your favorite memories that you had along the way? That will just stick with you. It wasn't something necessarily that you photographed or Facebook Live, but it's something that, that stuck with you.
Yeah. And boy, that's really a tough one. I mean, I think, and I hate to say this. I mean, we saw just the most incredible wildlife and most incredible sunsets. But it was literally the people that we met along the way. I mean, some of these families, they would literally just, do anything for us. We had people loan us their vehicles, every town we went into, they want to show off their town. They want to show you the history. We were taken out to eat, and I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but we were eating like kings. We were eating in these great restaurants, and I'd say 90% of the meals, they would not let us pay a penny, buying us beer, these lavish dinners. It was the camaraderie and the locals and the incredible hospitality of everyone we met. That's the one memory that even overshadows, the scenery and the different things that I saw along the way.
And, it really speaks volumes of what America really is about, right? That the spirit of hospitality and, what people really are about still exists. Sometimes you have to turn a rock over to find it, but it's still there. Because I know that you've mentioned, you had more instances of that rather than, being, harassed or whatnot. But, I mean, and you mentioned that you call them river angels. And on the flip side, when you're on the PCT, those people are called trail angels. But either way, you've got angels watching over you the whole way. And so it's phenomenal that, people will do that, which, that really gives you hope, right? You got people that are paying it forward, at Starbucks, they'll buy, or wherever it might be, they're paying for your food ahead of time. But these people are literally taking in these smelly, stinky river
tattooed, bearded, we're total strangers, except for a few conversations on like Facebook Messenger. They didn't really know who we were.
Well, and I can see it now. Brian, you come, rolling up onto the shore, and you've got all these black bugs or white flies or whatever all over your face, and you look like some
mud
freak, right? And so you need a shower. You haven't bathed in a couple of days, and and you're wet. You're completely soaked. So it takes a special person to, bring other people into their home. But I mean, that shows you the true kindness of people and the generosity that's out there. So that's really encouraging to hear that people still do that. A lot of times that's the type of stuff that you read about, but you don't really get to experience it. But you've experienced it on multiple, levels, which that right there speaks volumes, because it's not only did you experience it on the river, but also on the trails. So, I mean, you truly have gotten to experience what America is really about, right? And so So you guys started July 11th, and
July 15th. Yep.
July 15th, and you got done November 3rd. So you're roughly, that's what, August, September, October, 4 months or so.
I think we figured it out to be about 111 days.
Okay.
Now that's the total trip, not days paddling. We did take days off.
Sure, because I mean, Hurricane Zeta, you were off for what, a week, walking the streets of New Orleans and trying different foods and drinking different beers and having a good old time. I guess what's one of the things, like what we were just talking about with hospitality and such. And I know you guys were eating like kings and queens. What's one of your favorite meals that you had along the way that you probably have never had before? Is there something that you ate that you'd never gotten to experience?
Yeah, up in Minnesota, we were treated to 2 incredible walleye dinners. Walleye is a type of northern fish, which I'd heard of them, but I'd never had it, never seen one. So the walleye was just incredible. And then, and I don't know why this meal sticks out so much in my mind. We really did eat a lot of really nice. We stopped in Memphis and had Memphis barbecue. We stopped in, every city and kind of sampled the local cuisine. But it was a really rough day, and Chase and I paddled till almost dark, and we were just wiped out. We were starving. Stan had gotten on the beach earlier, and some people were following his little GPS. It leaves like little breadcrumbs of where Stan is. We didn't have that set up, but Stan did. This local couple saw him and said, "Is there anything you guys need?" And Stan said, "Yeah, me and my 2 buddies me and my 2 buddies will be here pretty soon. We'd love some hot food." They went to a restaurant and got us 3-foot-long shrimp po' boys, hot sandwiches. And I mean, literally as soon as me and Chase got there, they broke them out of the bag, and it was the best sandwich I'd ever had.
That sounds tasty. I definitely can agree with you on the walleye piece. When I used to go up to Minnesota on business, one of my favorite meals ever was I used to catch walleye when I was younger, when I would go fishing with my dad. But I ordered a meal of walleye planks with steamed veggies. Man, you couldn't beat that. Such a great tasting fish. Doesn't taste really fishy, right?
No.
You got a good fish when it doesn't taste fishy. And so, great food for sure. So I guess we'll just wrap up here, Brian. I know you are a man of adventure. You've done the PCT. You tried to do it a second time. Of course, COVID ruled that out. And then, you went over along the coastline, Santa Monica and Fort Bragg, and, dealing with all the beauty there. And then, you decide to, hey, let's go paddle the Mississippi River. So you're always thinking of the next great thing. What's next in the agenda for Brian Hoover?
Yeah. So I love sunshine. I love the water. And, I've done a long hike now. I've done a long backpacking trip. So, I wanted to kind of mix it up. I thought that I would buy a mountain bike and bicycle the Baja Divide, which goes from, San Diego, Tijuana down to Cabo San Lucas, about 1,700 miles. And I've just heard amazing stuff about how the locals are just, super friendly. I've heard there's not much danger as most people think.
Right.
Like I say, I love the ocean, love the beaches, love the desert. So I hope to do that with a couple of friends in January.
That sounds amazing. You probably need to brush up on your Espanol.
I do. and hopefully I remember how to ride a bike.
Right. Because you right now you're looking for one. You don't have a bike right now. So
no, I don't.
It's you definitely got to get that, because you got to, you've got your sea legs because, you've been paddling, but, now you need, instead of paddling, you got to pedal. And
so my legs have almost atrophied the last couple of months. I haven't been using them. So,
but like you said, as we both know, like the old phrase goes, it's like riding a bike, right? You'll pick it back up, and you'll basically work yourself back into being in shape to ride a bike along the course of the way. It's not like you're racing. You're out for a nice leisure ride. and you're going to enjoy it, right? It's going to be full of food and beer or cervejas, right?
Cerveza, yep.
Cervezas. So two dos X, por favor. You know, so you got, you know, I still know a little bit of Espanol, but yeah, talking about, you know, you had good food along the river. I can guarantee you hit some of these locals, they're going to hit you with some of that hole in the wall, amazing, either Tex-Mex or true authentic Mexican food. Man, you can't beat that. That's the best stuff. And and you better be ready, because you know that you're not going to be done until they say you're done, right? They're just going to keep bringing the food out, right?
Those okay. This boy likes to eat, so I'm not worried about that.
Fresh tortillas with butter, you know, sopapillas, you name it. Oh, it makes me hungry just thinking about it. So I'm excited to follow along on this next adventure that you have, because I know you always got great stuff. You always take great pictures, and you're always sharing things.
Thanks.
Where's one way that people that are listening or following along on video, where they can find some of your adventures and follow along? Because, man, I know you're on Facebook. I know you've got some YouTube stuff. How can someone find you?
Yeah. So, and basically, that's really all that I do. I shoot a lot of video. I should edit more of those videos and upload them. But I do have a YouTube channel called Tatur, Tatur, kind of a weird name. Stands for Tulsa Area Trail and Ultra Runners, Tatur. And my Facebook page. I promise my kids that I'll post on Instagram more, because they're not on Facebook that much. Or most, you know, you're younger. But Facebook at Brian Hoover, Brian, and then Hoover like the vacuum dam and the president. So
we just know that you don't suck, though, so it's all good. Well, Brian, like I said yesterday, it's always a pleasure to visit with you and get on with you and talk adventure. It's fun to talk about it and just kind of relive it. And I know you enjoy talking about it too, and sharing the adventures. And so be ready in spring 2021 when you're done, or maybe even along the way. Who knows? I'll reach out to you and we'll catch another glimpse of Brian in action and what you're experiencing. So I wish you all the best, my friend. We'll be talking to you on social media at some point. And you stay safe out there, brother. And like I tell everybody, we'll see you down the trail.
Okay. Hope to see you at a trail race soon.
Absolutely, my friend. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Okay. See you.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Bye-bye.